The storm struck at midnight, unleashing violent gusts and sheets of rain that poured from the sky, drowning the entire city in white. Every road was blocked, the power grid flickered in and out, and communication signals were unstable. Outside was a scene of chaos and destruction, but inside Hopewell Hospital, one of the few medical centers still standing, existed a different world, cold, exhausted, and thick with tension. Claire, the head nurse of the night shift, sat hunched in her chair after nearly 8 hours without rest. Her face was pale under the fluorescent lights, eyes sunken from sleeplessness and strain. Every sound around her, the wind whistling through the door cracks, the steady beeping of vital monitors, the hurried footsteps of fellow staff, merged into a heavy symphony of storm season night shifts. The wall clock ticked slowly. The wind howled past the window, and Claire instinctively pulled her shoulders in. She was reviewing patient charts when the hallway lights suddenly flickered repeatedly. Just seconds later, a soft click echoed. The automatic doors to the emergency lobby swung open, even though no incoming case had been registered in the system. Claire looked up. Her hands froze as her gaze shifted toward the entrance. The doors trembled slightly in the wind, and then, under the pale hallway lights, a strange figure appeared. A dog. Not a tiny dog that might be swept away by the wind, but a large German shepherd, drenched from head to toe. Rainwater streamed down its thick, dark fur, clumping it into heavy strands stuck to its skin. Its body trembled from the cold, but there was no panic in its movements. Instead, it stepped forward with steady, deliberate strides, ears alert, eyes sharp, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Karen, a nurse walking by, screamed in panic and dropped a tray of medicine. A stray dog! Who let it into the hospital? Others turned to look, a few instinctively backing away. But Claire didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the animal as it slowly made its way into the lobby. In its mouth, wet and clenched tight, was a small bundle wrapped in fabric, carefully held as if it were something precious. Claire took a few steps forward, but the dog stopped. It didn't retreat, nor did it advance. It placed its front legs down, lowered its head slightly, and stared at her, its eyes carrying not just fatigue but something deeper. Urgency, a silent message, or perhaps a plea that couldn't be spoken aloud. The room fell into silence. Only the wind outside and the rain hitting the windows could be heard. Everyone held their breath, waiting. Claire stepped forward again, her gaze locked on the dog. "It's not aggressive," she said quietly, her voice steady yet gentle, like she was speaking to a lost child. "Look, it wants us to see something." Karen still trembled, clutching her co-worker's arm, but said nothing more. And the dog stood there, soaked through, still holding the fabric bundle in its mouth, waiting, as if for the right person or the right moment, to deliver the most important gift of its life. And on that stormy night, while the hospital wrestled with chaos, while everyone focused on trauma cases and fragile lives, a silent creature with no voice walked in, like a question mark in the dark. Where did it come from? Why this place? And what was inside the bundle? Claire didn't know yet, but she was certain of one thing. This, whatever it was, and that dog, were not here by accident. The air in the hospital lobby grew thick. Even the rhythm of breathing seemed to halt. The German shepherd stood motionless, soaked to the bone, but its gaze never left Claire, as if it instinctively knew she was the one who would understand what it was trying to say. Claire took another step, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out. The fabric bundle looked old and crumpled, one corner darkened by rainwater, but what startled her wasn't how it looked. It had just moved. "Wait," Claire murmured, narrowing her eyes for a better look. And at that exact moment, a scream erupted from behind her. "Oh my God, something's moving in there!" The cry sliced through the quiet night like a knife, shaking the entire night shift crew. A few nurses jumped back in alarm, eyes wide and terrified, all staring at the strange figure still frozen in the hallway. Fear spread like a cold mist, But Claire stepped forward. Without hesitation, without a second thought, she rushed toward the dog. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, the German Shepherd moved only slightly. It didn't bark. It didn't back away. Instead, it tilted its head, ears perked, eyes locked on Claire, with a look that wasn't frantic, but urgent in a way words couldn't express. Its breathing was heavy, labored from exhaustion, but not from fear. It was the breath of someone who had weathered a storm, who had held on with every ounce of strength just to find the one person who might understand. Claire froze for a split second under that gaze, a gaze that couldn't speak but pleaded louder than any voice. Her throat tightened. Something about it pulled her somewhere distant, somewhere primal, where her human instinct told her this wasn't just an animal, this was a soldier, a guardian, maybe even a hero sent here by fate tonight. She knelt down, her hands shaking as they reached for the soaked bundle. The fabric was ice-cold against her fingers, and her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the rest of the world. A strange chill crept up her spine. Not from fear, but from a gut-deep sense that something unthinkable was about to reveal itself. The dog lowered its head too, as if watching every movement Claire made. And in that moment, as her fingers gripped the edge of the cloth and began to pull, the world skipped a beat. Inside the old, soggy bundle was a baby, unbelievably tiny, lips tinted blue, skin pale and lifeless. The infant's body moved only faintly, like a dying butterfly's last flutter. Raindrops dripped from the dog's soaked fur onto the baby's fragile, wrinkled face, as if it had never once known the warmth of a full day. "Oh no! It's a child! A newborn!" Claire gasped, nearly shouting. In an instant, the night shift sprang to life. Chaos erupted in the hallway. Footsteps pounded, voices called out in panic, and orders rang through the air. "Get Dr. Grant, prep trauma room 2. Where's the infant warmer? Bring the heating unit now. Hurry! The breathing is barely there." Claire could no longer distinguish who was saying what. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart and the faint, fragile breaths of the tiny life in her arms. She wrapped the baby in the nearest dry towel, holding the freezing body like she was clutching the last thread of hope. The infant was so small, so delicate, like even the gentlest motion could extinguish its life. The dog still stood there, watching Claire's every move, its head tilted slightly as if trying to hear each sound from the tiny human. Not a bark, not a twitch, just silent, steadfast presence, like a soldier standing guard. "We don't have much time," Claire shouted as she sprinted down the hallway, giving orders while clutching the baby to her chest. Nurses cleared the path, emergency room doors burst open, and stark white light spilled into the dim corridor, redrawing the line between life and death. Inside the trauma room, Claire gently laid the baby on the table, her voice shaking. "Respiratory failure, severe hypothermia, possible dehydration and acute malnutrition, prep fluids, full body warming. Call NICU, urgent." The machines began to beep in rapid succession. A doctor entered and nodded at Claire. "Well done. You just gave this baby a fighting chance." Claire didn't respond. She turned towards the hallway. The dog was still there, sitting like a stone statue, unmoving amid the storm that raged outside. She walked closer to the glass doors, eyes fixed on the drenched figure. A slight shiver ran down her spine as her mind raced with questions. Where had this child come from? Who could have left it like that? And in that moment, Claire felt something profoundly real, an invisible thread pulling everyone closer together through the chaos. A dog that couldn't speak had sounded an alarm the world had nearly missed. The storm still howled beyond the walls, but inside the hospital, a new battle had begun. The fight for the life of a nameless child. And at the end of the hallway, a silent soldier watched on, as if still waiting for his mission to be fully complete. The vital signs monitor let out uneven beeps, at times fast, at times slow, mirroring the baby's breath as it hovered on the edge between life and death. In Trauma Room 2, the fluorescent lights flickered under the strain of a failing backup system after hours of emergency operation. Several non-essential devices had already been shut off to conserve energy, but for a pediatric resuscitation case like this, every second lost could mean a death sentence. Claire tightened her gloves. Sweat trickled down her forehead, despite the cold air leaking in from the drafty room. The glass doors trembled, and the wind from the hallway swept in, carrying the scent of damp earth and the chilling breath of the storm. One of the two infant warmers suddenly went dark, leaving only one functioning unit. Its faint hum filled the room with a nervous tension. Skin temperatures dropped to 32 degrees Celsius, a nurse murmured, eyes glued to the screen. This isn't good. The warmer's not hitting the target temperature. We need to accelerate surface warming. Bring every thick blanket left. Open the oxygen flow. I'm losing the pulse. Claire spoke, but her voice no longer carried the usual precision. Instead, it was laced with urgency. A wave of helplessness passed through her as she stared at the oxygen saturation monitor, numbers dipping and surging as if the machine itself didn't trust its own readings. The fourth pump is slowing down. Power's too unstable. It's not pushing evenly. A doctor on duty reported, voice sharp with frustration. Claire rushed over to manually adjust the drip, her fingers trembling as she tried to regulate the flow of glucose into the baby's tiny vein. A purplish line of blood was still visible on the infant's hand, so fragile that Claire bit her lip just to stop her own panic. We can't let the vein burst. We can't lose the line again. Suddenly, the emergency lights in the hallway outside flashed rapidly. Someone rushed in to report. Trauma case from the first floor is incoming. Only one attending left. Claire turned, her eyes filled with strain. She signaled for Dr. Grant to maintain heart rhythm and monitor blood pressure, then leaned down, pressing her ear close to the baby's chest, desperate for even the faintest breath. But all she could hear was the wet rattle of fluid-filled lungs, and a silence so heavy it nearly crushed her. We can't lose this baby. Not after everything it survived. Outside the glass doors, Duke was still watching. The rain had soaked through his fur, dripping steadily onto the tiled floor. But what made Claire freeze for a moment was his eyes. They were no longer calm. Duke was restless, scraping his front paws against the floor. His snout lifted slightly as if to howl, but something held it back. All that came was a forceful breath, fogging the glass in front of him. Claire turned back. Her eyes landed on the monitor. A short, flat line crawled across the screen. Her heart clenched. No pulse! Start CPR! The nurses leaped into action. Claire placed her hands on the baby's chest, pressing rhythmically, while another nurse delivered oxygen through a mask. The trauma room spiraled into chaos again. But this time it was chaos born of fear. The fear of losing a life is carried here by the unwavering loyalty of a dog in the storm. With every compression, Claire glanced toward the hallway, toward Duke, whose eyes never left her. In them she saw a plea, a weight no language could express. It was as if Duke knew something they didn't, and he was begging them, don't give up. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. And then a ripple returned on the screen. A faint signal. The entire room seemed to hold its breath until the baby let out a soft whimper, chest rising and falling with fragile motion. Claire exhaled deeply, nearly collapsing onto the table. She wiped her forehead, tears streaking across her cheek. No one cheered. No one clapped. There was only a silent nod exchanged between doctors. Claire lifted her head and looked quietly toward the door. She stood, walking out to where the dog still sat, silent and drenched, fur matted down by the rain. He's alive, she whispered, not even sure who she was speaking to. But the dog seemed to hear. Its ears perked up, and a glint of light sparked in its eyes. Its body trembled, not from cold, not from exhaustion, but from a sigh that seemed to rise from deep inside its chest like a weight had finally been eased. Claire stepped closer, crouched down, and gently touched the top of its head. The baby's okay now. Thank you. But instead of lying down with the calm of a dog who had completed its mission, Duke. She now noticed the name engraved on the small metal tag around its collar. Did something else. He stood up, took a step back, then moved forward again, sniffing the air, eyes flicking toward the glass doors. What is it? The baby's safe. Duke didn't return the peaceful gaze he had earlier. Instead, there was something urgent in his movement. He paced back and forth in front of the emergency room doors, head lowered, tail down, not in fear, but as if trying to tell Claire something was unfinished. Claire frowned. You want to go back? Is there someone else? Duke paused, then let out a single bark. Just one, but clear and deliberate. His eyes locked on hers, pleading. Gone was the look of an exhausted creature that had braved a storm. Something else was driving him now. The emergency room slowly settled into a quiet rhythm once more, the only sound coming from the monitor's soft, intermittent beeping, like the fragile but real breath of life just pulled back from the edge. Claire stood still by the incubator, her eyes fixed on the tiny body now being warmed and rehydrated. Though the room's soft lighting gave the illusion of calm, something inside her churned, a strange, burning feeling that something wasn't over. Something remained unfinished. She turned to the glass doors, where Duke still stood, paws soaked, traces of mud clinging to his mottled gray fur. His eyes no longer carried the panic of earlier, but were now filled with visible urgency. He didn't bark, but moved restlessly, circling once, stepping toward the door, then doubling back, scratching lightly at the floor as if to say, "Hurry! Follow me." Claire stepped closer, frowning. Her instincts told her this dog hadn't come alone, that somewhere out there, something, or someone, still needed help. But just as she reached for the door, a sharp voice cut in behind her. "Claire, what do you think you're doing?" She turned. Linda, the day shift's head nurse, currently on emergency coverage, was striding toward her, face like ice. Her eyes were wary, chin tilted in authority. "You're just going to let that filthy animal sit in the hospital all night? It's soaked the floor, and who knows what kind of bacteria it's carrying." Claire answered calmly. "Linda, that dog just brought a baby to us. A baby who wouldn't be alive right now without him. I know. However, my responsibility is to maintain sanitary conditions for the entire facility. You can't let a stray dog, K9 tag or not, wander the medical wing." Claire took a step forward, standing between Duke and Linda. Her voice was low, but firm. "Duke isn't a stray. He's a former service dog. He hasn't caused a single disturbance, hasn't barked, hasn't misbehaved, and more importantly, he didn't come here by accident. Can't you see he's trying to tell us something?" Linda folded her arms, eyes narrowing with skepticism. She looked Duke up and down, then scoffed. "Dogs don't talk, Claire. He's just hungry or cold, and I think he's gotten more than enough attention for one night." With that, she stepped forward, hand outstretched to grab Duke's collar. But suddenly Duke backed away and gave a low growl, not out of aggression, but as a reflex. Claire immediately stepped in front of him. "Don't do that. He's wary of strangers." Linda froze, frustrated. "If he barks again, I'll have security escort him out. You're letting your emotions interfere with your judgment, Claire." Claire didn't answer. But before Linda could turn away, a younger nurse, Jamie, rushed in, out of breath. "Claire, the baby, just moved his hand. I think he's out of immediate danger." Both women paused. Claire glanced at Duke. He had stopped pacing, standing still as if waiting for that confirmation. But only moments later, he turned again toward the entrance and scratched lightly at the floor, eyes fixed on the storm beyond the glass. Linda crossed her arms. "I don't care what he's trying to act out. But if you don't get him out of here right now, I'm reporting this to the board." Claire swallowed hard and looked out into the raging storm. The wind screamed through the door gaps, streetlights blurred behind sheets of rain. Duke let out a single bark. Just one. Soft, but unmistakable. It was enough to draw attention. Enough to make ignoring him impossible. "He's not done," Claire whispered. Linda raised an eyebrow. "What?" Claire turned to face her fully, eyes steady. I believe there's someone else out there. Someone Duke wants us to find. Maybe the baby's mother. Maybe she left him here knowing she couldn't make it to safety herself. Linda let out a dry laugh. What is this? A rescue drama now? Are you writing a movie script? But Claire didn't laugh. She stepped forward, gently resting her hand on Duke's head. I believe you. Duke lifted his gaze to hers, eyes locking, and in that look, Claire felt something undeniable. A call, a mission, born not of words, but of love. Then she turned back to Linda and said simply, If the board needs a report, I'll be the one to write it. Linda stared, fuming, but said nothing more. Duke, as if in thanks, lowered his ears slightly, then turned and began walking toward the main doors, toward the storm still howling to drown out the world. Claire looked at Jamie. Call the local police desk. Ask if anyone nearby can come to assist. As soon as Claire finished telling Jamie to call the police, Duke moved. The restless pacing was gone. In its place was something eerie in its solemnity. Duke sat upright, front legs planted firmly, head held high, eyes locked on Claire. And then, without warning, he barked. The sound echoed through the hospital hallway like a bell tolling through a winter night. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't rushed. It was deep, resonant, solid, a command, a declaration, a signal. Linda flinched at the sound, shoulders jerking up as though she'd heard a sudden explosion. She backed up quickly, bumping hard into a nearby medical cart. It rattled against the wall, clattering loudly in the stillness. You see, I told you! She cried, her voice shaking with fear, eyes fixed on Duke like he was a threat. That thing is dangerous. Who knows if it's rabid? Didn't you hear that bark? It sounded like it was ready to attack. No, he hasn't hurt anyone, Claire replied calmly. Hasn't hurt doesn't mean won't. Linda nearly lost her composure. This is a sterile facility, for the living and the barely hanging on, not a kennel. What if he's carrying the disease? What if he shocks a patient? Or gets in the way of the staff? Can you take responsibility for that? Duke didn't break his gaze from the two women, but he also didn't move. His eyes had softened, but urgency still radiated from them. A waiting, a plea. Claire didn't move either. She knelt in front of Duke, her eyes flickering with something new. A thought that had been quietly forming in her mind now sharpened into focus. Gently, she brushed aside the wet fur at his neck, fingers searching the strap where a small metal tag hung. The dim light from the ceiling reflected faintly off its surface, its engraved letters dulled by rain and time. Claire let out a quiet gasp. Wait, this is... She wiped the tag with her finger. The words became clearer. Fairview Police Department, K-9 Unit. Name, Duke. Time seemed to pause. Claire looked up, her expression shifting from doubt to realization, then to certainty. She whispered, unsure if she was speaking to herself or the dog. You're K-9. Right then, Duke let out another short bark, sharp, firm. Not a warning, not a protest. It was a response, a confirmation. Then he sat down again, still and composed. Linda stepped back half a pace, hands clenched. Even worse than I thought, she hissed. He's a working dog? Then he definitely shouldn't be in here. Those dogs are trained in high-stress environments. Who knows how he'll react to strangers? He could snap on anyone at any time. Claire remained kneeling, hands resting gently on the tag, as if holding a sacred fragment of someone's past. She shook her head, eyes steady. No, Linda, he's not just a dog. He's a soldier. And soldiers don't abandon their missions. Linda stepped forward, frustration rising. You're being sentimental, Claire. Even if he was a service dog, he's retired. You don't know where he came from, if he's vaccinated, or what condition he's in. This is a hospital, not a place to let feelings take the wheel. Claire stood, facing her, voice quiet but firm. I know the line between emotion and judgment, Linda. But there's one thing I can't ignore. The instinct of someone who's spent their life saving others. And Duke, through everything he's done since entering this building, is trying to tell us something. Linda narrowed her eyes. He's just sitting there. What makes you think that? Claire took a deep breath. then answered slowly. Because of his eyes. They look just like the eyes of someone who brings in a patient. No begging, no panic, just one request. Trust me. The hallway fell into silence. Only the wind howled outside, and the occasional beep from medical monitors broke the stillness. Linda looked at Claire, then at Duke, still seated upright, ears perked, eyes unwavering. She shook her head. Fine, but I won't be responsible if anything happens. Claire nodded. I will. She sat down beside Duke, gazing into his eyes. So now, tell me, Duke, there's someone else, isn't there? Something out there we haven't seen? Duke lifted his head slightly, tilting it to the left, as if listening for something no one else could hear. His tail didn't wag. His body didn't move. But his eyes, those eyes, still glowed with the purpose of a mission unfinished. A soft siren wailed at the hospital gates, piercing through the relentless downpour. The front doors slid open, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps splashing through puddles. A police officer stepped inside, tall and lean, his dark jacket soaked through with rain. The hallway lights reflected off the badge on his chest, catching a glint of gold that read, Ryan McConnell, South District Patrol Unit. His arrival brought the hallway to a brief standstill. Linda, just about to shove Duke out the door, froze and turned sharply toward the newcomer. Claire stepped forward immediately. You're the officer who took the hospital's call? Her voice was calm, but urgency simmered just beneath the surface. Ryan nodded. You're the one who reported a canine dog arriving with a newborn child? Claire pointed toward Duke, who still stood in the same spot, his eyes now locked on the officer. As if recognizing something familiar, Duke lifted a paw slightly, then barked. One clear, resolute bark. It wasn't anxious or excited. It was a greeting, a signal shared by those who'd once served the same line. Ryan paused for a beat, then crouched down, inspecting Duke's tag. His expression flickered with surprise. Definitely a retired canine. That posture, that response, this dog isn't ordinary. Linda, still unwilling to yield, snapped. Retired means no longer active. Why is a hospital, already in crisis mode, allowing a dog to occupy its hallway? Ryan didn't even get a chance to respond before Duke made his move. It wasn't a panicked reaction or the erratic behavior of a stressed animal. It was deliberate, composed. Duke turned sharply and trotted toward the main doors with purpose in every step. Just a few paces from the entrance, he stopped and looked back, not with desperation but with intent. An invitation, a call to follow. Then he barked again, a single commanding bark, strong, short, echoing through the corridor like it was meant to shatter whatever doubt still lingered in the air. He scratched lightly at the floor, one front paw lifted and pointed toward the storm still raging outside as if to say, "Come with me, right now." Ryan stood frozen for a moment, then gave a slight nod, like something had just clicked. He's trying to lead us. Lead? Where? Linda interjected, her brow furrowed, clutching her clipboard like a last defense against the chaos unraveling before her. We don't know, Claire replied, her eyes still fixed on Duke. But a dog doesn't wrap a newborn in a blanket, push through a storm, and find the one hospital still functioning, without a reason. And if Duke did that, then there's something else out there. Something serious. Ryan looked at Claire, then to Linda. I'm going with him. Claire didn't hesitate. So am I. You can't, Linda burst out. Claire, the shift is understaffed. You're in charge tonight. If you leave, I'll have to report it to the board. Claire turned to face her. There was no tension in her face now, just a strange stillness. Like amid the blaring storm and sharp scent of antiseptic, she'd found something stronger than protocol. Belief. If I stay and manage a chaotic shift, she said, her voice low but steady, I might save a few people. But if I go with Duke, I might save a family or even more. We're in the middle of something no protocol manual can explain, but my heart tells me this dog didn't come back alone. Linda was silent. Claire didn't wait for her approval. She turned to Ryan, voice firm. I'll request permission from the hospital if necessary, but I'm going." "You sure?" Ryan asked softly. One last check. Claire nodded. She unpinned the name tag from her chest and slipped it into the pocket of a nearby nurse's coat. "If anything urgent comes up, contact me on the radio. I'll stay in touch." Then they ran. The glass doors slid open, and the cold, wet air hit them like an invisible wall. Duke was already moving. No commands needed, no leash, like the route was already burned into his mind. Claire and Ryan kept close behind, their steps splashing through the flooded pavement as the dim streetlights struggled to pierce the thick curtain of rain. Gusts of wind swept through in violent bursts, sending Claire's hair flying back. But she paid no mind. Her eyes stayed locked on the sturdy figure ahead. Duke, the dog, soaked to the bone yet running with unwavering purpose in every stride. No one knew where they were going. No one knew what they might find in the midst of that relentless storm. Just as they reached the edge of the hospital gate, where only the dull lights and the sound of rain remained, a voice suddenly crackled through the radio, clipped to Claire's chest. "Claire, wait!" She and Ryan stopped in unison. Duke, too, came to a halt, turning back, ears perked as if straining to listen. The static fizzled again, followed by the familiar voice of Dr. Grant, head of the emergency shift, urgent but composed. "We just held an emergency huddle in the control room. If that dog brought in a critical infant, there's a high chance someone else is still out there needing help. With the current weather conditions, I can't allow you to go without backup. An ambulance is leaving the bay now. They'll follow you and Officer Ryan. Stay in contact." Claire tightened her grip on the radio, a quiet warmth spreading through her frozen fingers. She didn't say much, just a firm copy, then looked at Ryan as if to say, "We're not alone anymore." Moments later, from the far end of the hospital drive, a red light blinked through the rain. The ambulance rolled slowly through the gate, headlights sweeping across the waterlogged road, casting a glow on Duke's upright back like a surge of new energy. A nurse leaned out from the passenger window, yelling above the wind. "We're right behind you. If anyone's hurt, signal us immediately." Duke continued forward without hesitation, cutting through the dense and bitterly cold night rain like an arrow. But this time he wasn't running alone. Behind him was no longer just the fading hospital light, but a team, a force ready to act, because they believed in something greater than procedure, in life, and in a retired canine dog guiding them toward a secret still buried in the storm. Beneath a wall of blinding rain, the three of them, Duke, Ryan, and Claire, stepped into what felt like a forgotten world. Streetlights flickered and died, bare tree branches stretched twisted shadows across the glistening road, and the ambulance rolled slowly behind, matching Duke's pace. The tires sliced through ankle-deep water, waves swelling with every turn. Claire sat in the front passenger seat, her hand clenching the strap of her radio, eyes glued to the dog's silhouette ahead. Duke wasn't sprinting, but every stride was steady and purposeful, like each footfall landed with intent. His soaked figure grew darker against the storm, and whenever the headlights swept over him, the glistening wet fur flashed briefly in the dim light, wearied but unbreakable. From the police cruiser, Ryan rolled the window down slightly, head tilted as he watched Duke's every move, a note of admiration in his voice. "Never seen a K9 keep that kind of rhythm post-retirement," he muttered, mostly to himself. Claire said nothing. She glanced at her watch. Nearly 30 minutes since Duke had started leading them, and they were now far beyond the city's center. Everything was deserted. Storefronts were shuttered tight, awnings rattling violently under the pressure of the wind. In some places, broken signs had been ripped from their posts, now scattered like abandoned sails across the flooded road. Still, Duke didn't pause. He charged forward through the rain like a soldier long hardened by trials. Every step felt deliberate, as if he knew the turns by heart, every slick sidewalk, every hidden danger. One look into his eyes that didn't blink even against the howling gusts, and anyone would know. He wasn't just running. He was fulfilling a mission. Claire opened the ambulance door just slightly to get a better view, her hand tightening on the freezing steel handle. And then, as if slicing clean through the rising tension, a strange flash of light burst from the right. Headlights. A massive truck, barreling forward without warning, with no emergency lights, no horn, roaring through the flooded street like a beast unleashed. Water surged up in waves, mud and rain splashing violently, blanketing the ambulance windshield in a thick layer of grime. Ryan instantly raised a hand, signaling to stop. "Claire, watch out!" Tires screeched through the rain as the ambulance braked hard, skidding slightly as the rear wheels slipped on the slick road. Claire gasped and let out a startled scream, her heart leaping into her throat. In that split second, she caught a glimpse of the truck barreling in from the right alleyway, cutting across the intersection, right as Duke dashed into the middle of the street. "Duke!" she shouted, slamming her palm against the ambulance window, eyes wide with horror. Ryan yelled too, his voice cracking through the chaos. "Move! Get out of the way!" But Duke didn't stop. In the blink of an eye, just before the monstrous truck thundered past like a nightmare forged from steel, Duke spun, veered sideways, and dove headfirst into a tiny gap beneath the chassis. Claire and Ryan froze. The truck roared on, tearing through the rain with a deafening growl, leaving behind a trail of flying water and a hollow echo that seemed to slice through the air itself. Claire held her breath. She shoved the ambulance door open, slipping and falling onto the waterlogged pavement, screaming through the downpour, "Duke! Duke!" Ryan rushed over, flashlight gripped tight, sweeping it across the road. And then, from the far edge of the opposite curb, a bark rang out, sharp and unmistakable. "Woof!" Duke emerged, caked in mud, his fur matted with rain, but his eyes still burned with the same bright fire, undimmed by fear. He stood there, panting, legs trembling slightly from the cold wind, but his body remained upright. Claire choked up, her heart rising from the pit where it had plummeted seconds earlier. She rushed to him, fell to her knees, and placed her shaking hands on his shoulders. "Oh my God, Duke. You're insane, but thank you. Thank you for not giving up." Ryan came closer, no longer just an officer on duty, but a man in awe. He nodded solemnly. That's not an ordinary dog. Under the faint streetlights and the pounding rain, Claire crouched beside Duke, still breathless after watching him risk everything to dive under a moving truck. But as she leaned in closer, her eyes caught something strange. On Duke's front left paw, there was a dark smear, mud mixed with something else. Blood. Her brows furrowed. She reached out, gently parting the wet fur to get a better look. Oh God. There it was. Streaks of blood, not much, but enough to know it wasn't just dirt. A shallow cut, likely from shattered glass or sharp debris littering the flooded road. Claire instinctively reached for his paw to check the wound, but Duke took a small step back. Not from pain, but because he didn't want to stop. Duke tilted his head slightly, gaze locked onto Claire's, then flicked toward Ryan as if to say, "I'm fine. Don't slow down for me. We still have work to do." Claire froze. Part of her wanted to stay, to clean the wound, to wrap it in gauze and keep him safe. But another part, one that understood the cost of hesitation, knew that if she held Duke back now, she might be taking time away from someone out there who couldn't afford to wait. Duke barked again, short, clear, urging them on, then turned and resumed his stride across the slippery sidewalk, leaving behind a trail of faint paw prints, blurred with water and blood on the cold gray concrete. Ryan leaned slightly, watching him go, then turned to Claire. "Can we stop and patch it temporarily?" Claire shook her head, voice caught in her throat. "He doesn't want that. We keep moving, but..." She quickly pulled a small pouch from her coat. "I've got alcohol and dry gauze. If we get a moment, I'll clean it up." "For now?" Ryan nodded, voice low with respect. "We stay close. If a wounded dog can keep pushing like this, then whoever he's leading us to must be in even worse shape." Claire looked back at the trail, smudges of blood and rain slowly vanishing into the night. She stood, wiped the rain from her face, and followed Duke, who had turned back once more, already marching ahead. No pause. No comfort is needed. Just a single look, one glance that said more than words ever could, before he pushed on. The storm hadn't let up, but now, within the fury of the wind and rain, a single creature pressed forward, driven by loyalty, by courage, and by a mission no one else could yet understand. And behind him were those who, though soaked and weary, kept following, because they knew that at the end of this road, another life might still be waiting to be saved. The rain kept pouring over the city like it had no intention of letting up. The ambulance headlights swept across rows of storm-ravaged homes, roofs torn apart by wind, sheets of rusted metal hanging like shredded steel banners, walls stained with mud, pocked with rain damage, fences flattened, windows blown wide open, soaked curtains flapping in the wind like faded, forgotten flags. Weeds lay flattened against the earth, bushes trembling under the pressure of the gale, creating a scene so chaotic, so raw, it felt like a stage just emptied after a violent tragedy. Duke slowed down. Claire, still seated in the ambulance cabin, had never taken her eyes off his silhouette. Even with his back soaked, and paws still bloodied from earlier, he kept moving without pause. But when he reached a fractured intersection, where the road split into 3 muddy, flooded paths, he stopped. Claire and Ryan halted too. The headlights cast Duke's shadow long across the road, motionless, his ears standing tall like radar dishes stretched to their limit. All 3 paths ahead looked nearly identical, waterlogged, muddy, swallowed by the same white haze of rain. No tire tracks, no lights, only weeds swaying in the wind, the scent of rotting trash, and the slow drip of water from rusted gutters in the cold, empty air. Claire stepped down from the vehicle and approached cautiously. "Do you think he still remembers the way?" Her voice was soft, not out of doubt, but the kind of fear that comes with knowing some storms are more than weather. Ryan didn't answer. He watched Duke, now lowering his head, nose sweeping carefully across every crack and puddle. The dog sniffed long and deep, each movement radiating a quiet intensity. Then, like something ancient had stirred in the back of his mind, Duke suddenly lifted his head. A strange spark lit up his brown eyes. Without hesitation, he turned left. "He's chosen!" Ryan called out. Claire rushed back, signaling the driver to follow. The left alley was narrower than the others, flanked by overgrown wild trees whose branches interwove like thin skeletal arms. The wind whispered through the leaves, a shivering rustle blending with the steady roar of rain. Water streamed down the old cement trench, dragging dry leaves, bits of trash, and faint streaks of blood still clinging to Duke's claws. Claire's brow furrowed as she noticed Duke's gait had grown slightly uneven, but he didn't slow down. On the contrary, he picked up pace, each step fueled by memory, of a path once familiar, a scent once etched into his being, and a silent promise never forgotten. Ryan leaned in, his voice barely audible above the rain. "I think this used to be the way he walked every day, with someone he hasn't let go of." Claire looked at him, then ahead again. At the end of the alley, a small house slowly emerged through the rain. It sat half submerged in tall, flooded grass, surrounded by crumbled bricks, ruins left behind in the wake of the storm. The outer paint had peeled off in jagged patches, revealing cold, gray cement underneath. One corner of the tin roof had peeled away, flapping with a metallic creak each time the wind slammed into it like a muffled cry. The front door, a patchwork of uneven wooden slats, swayed back and forth, knocking gently against the frame every time the wind surged, making a sound not loud but unsettling, like a heartbeat gone erratic, like a cry for help long forgotten. Duke suddenly froze. The calm was gone. He pushed forward toward the door, sniffing rapidly, paws digging into the ground like he was holding back a storm of instinct. His ears stood high, his snout parted slightly, breath coming harder now. Claire had barely reached him when he spun around and locked eyes with her and Ryan, eyes burning with urgency. Without waiting for a command, Duke turned sharply, tapped one front paw against the floor 3 quick times, then stared at the door again. It wasn't a random gesture. It was the trained signal of a K-9 unit detecting an emergency. Claire recognized it instantly. Her heartbeat kicked up. Ryan froze too. He stood silently, watching Duke, then slowly pulled out his flashlight and pointed it toward the narrow gap under the door. Inside, nothing was clearly visible, just shifting shadows of scattered objects, still and ghostly in the dimness. But the stillness itself felt wrong, like the house wasn't empty, just hiding something. Something fragile, waiting to be found. The wind surged again. The door slammed harder against the frame, jolting all 3 of them. Duke didn't wait. He barked once, short, dry, and sharp. Not loud like before, just final. This is the place. Under the flickering beam of a flashlight and the low, constant hum of rain behind them, the old wooden door creaked open, revealing a darkness so thick it seemed to swallow the light whole. Ryan stepped in first, sweeping the beam from left to right, illuminating cluttered shapes emerging from the shadows. Claire followed closely, gripping the edge of the door to stop it from slamming into Ryan as the wind howled through the gap. Duke came in last. Quiet, but not slow. His nose close to the ground, ears twitching, alert to every sound. Inside, the house was heartbreakingly disordered, as though time itself had come to a halt in the middle of a life interrupted. An old sofa slumped in the far left corner, its torn fabric exposing yellowed foam and rusted coils jutting out like wire bones. The floor was wet, streaked with mud, and a low wooden table stood alone, with 2 upside-down plastic cups still resting on top. One of them tipped over, collecting cloudy rainwater that had dripped through the leaky roof above. Near the wall, a small baby crib appeared under the flashlight's beam. Inside were a few damp, wrinkled blankets, a bottle placed upside down on a stained towel, and a tiny baby robe, neatly folded, now coated with dust. Everything in the room seemed to be paused in the middle of a day that never finished. An unfinished meal, unwashed blankets, a life abandoned, not violently but quietly, as if the person who lived here had just stepped outside and never came back. And yet the silence was too deep, too complete, the kind of absence that felt permanent. No footsteps, no doors creaking further inside, no warmth is left in the walls, just the 3 of them, and the dog who now stood motionless, like a piece of the home still refusing to leave. Ryan frowned. He swept the beam of his flashlight around the room again, then slowly turned to Claire. "There's no one here," he said, voice low and clipped. There was no sign of panic, no evidence of a rushed escape, only a lingering exhaustion, as if whoever had lived here had run out of strength to scream or fight back. Ryan tried to stay composed, but there was a flicker of doubt behind his eyes. It was the look of someone who'd trusted his instincts, and now wondered if maybe he had put faith in the wrong thing. The baby Duke had carried in was real. But the mother? Was there hope? Or were they all just chasing the fading instincts of a dog too old to be on a mission? Suddenly, Duke stepped forward and barked once, his eyes fixed on a low bookshelf. A piece of paper, caught in a gust, had fluttered from the table and lodged beneath the coffee table. Duke nosed it out, then turned back toward Claire, giving another soft bark, as if signaling something important. Claire bent down and picked up the page. It was crumpled, the corners torn from moisture, and the blue ballpoint ink had smudged in places. But the handwriting was still legible. Each word felt soaked in panic, in desperation, like the final breath of a mother who had reached the very end of her strength. "If someone finds this, please save my son. My name is Sarah. My son's name is Tyler. He's had a high fever for a day. I've tried to keep him warm, boiled water on a small camping stove, and wrapped him in every blanket I had left. But it wasn't enough. I don't have a car. My phone stopped working when the storm came. Water leaked through the roof before I could fix it. I tried to get to the main road, but I didn't know this whole area had been evacuated the day before. All I have left is this house, a very sick child, and a dog. I used to think I was strong, but last night, when I saw Tyler lying still in the crib, lips cracked, body shaking, I knew I wasn't enough. I couldn't carry him out into the storm. I was afraid he'd freeze in my arms before we made it anywhere safe. There was no other choice. I wrapped him up and prayed. I looked into Duke's eyes and whispered, "Go. Save him. Find someone. Please. If this dog brought Tyler to someone kind, please, save my son. I don't care what happens to me anymore. I'll wait, if I can." Claire's hands trembled as she finished reading. Not from the cold, but from the weight of every word, each one striking like a silent storm to the chest. The letter was soaked in quiet agony, the voice of a mother alone in the middle of a disaster, with no phone, no car, no neighbors, and nowhere left to go, fighting to keep her child alive hour by hour, minute by minute. And when there was nothing more she could do, she gave everything she had left by entrusting her child's life to a dog. Ryan stepped closer, his eyes scanning the page. Then he went still. He didn't speak, only shook his head slowly. "She really did fight until the very last second," Claire said softly, her voice nearly drowned out by the rain. "We have to find Sarah. She didn't leave this place. She said she'd wait, if she could." Duke remained still, his eyes locked on Claire's. And when their gazes met, woman and dog, something wordless passed between them, something undeniable. The dog turned, stepping into the cold puddle just beyond the doorway, then looked back at them one more time. A beat later, Duke barked. Once. It wasn't loud, nor forceful, but it pierced the heavy silence hanging between them. Without waiting for a reply, he turned sharply and started running. Around the side of the house, into the waist-high wild grass where the ambulance light could no longer reach. Claire lunged forward instinctively, her eyes tracking his fading shape through the rain. Then she stood. "Ryan," she gasped, breath catching. "Duke. He knows where she is." Ryan didn't move at first. He stood at the doorway, caught between reason and instinct. His eyes flicked to the letter, still shaking in Claire's hand, the smeared ink, the words of a mother on the edge. And then he remembered the fragile baby in Claire's arms, and the unwavering look in Duke's eyes when he'd brought that child through the emergency room doors. "You can turn back," Claire said, reading the hesitation in him. "I'll go alone if I have to." Ryan's hand tightened on the strap of his sidearm. He shook his head. "Number, you're not walking into this storm alone," he said, and stepped into the rain, collar pulled high. "Let's go. We've trusted that dog this far. No reason to stop now." Claire nodded, and the two of them ran into the thick curtain of rain. The rain continued to fall like a waterfall from the sky, drowning sound, swallowing light, and turning the entire city into a shivering silver veil in the wind. Claire and Ryan pushed through the waterlogged grass behind the house, their steps heavy in the mud, following the blur of Duke's shadow darting ahead toward a narrow path lined with nearly toppled trees. The wind howled, pressing their soaked coats to their skin, icy and sharp, but neither of them stopped. Suddenly, Duke halted beneath a broken tree trunk, at the mouth of a small path leading into what looked like an abandoned park. His eyes were fixed forward. Then he let out a soft bark. Ryan raised his flashlight and aimed it ahead. Both he and Claire stopped cold. Beneath a rusted street lamp, long since burned out, partially veiled by the dense rain, was a figure, a woman curled in on herself, trembling uncontrollably, her hair matted to her face, clinging to a small scrap of fabric pressed tightly to her chest, an old baby onesie, soaked and stained with mud. Her bare legs were pale and bluish, covered in bits of leaves and trash, her head slumped to one side, back resting against the lamppost as if her body had given up long ago. "Sarah!" Claire cried out, not even knowing how she was sure. but something inside her clenched the moment she saw the woman. Duke sprinted ahead, barking non-stop. The sound rang out against the colorless sky like a siren, jolting Ryan and Claire into motion. They rushed to her side and dropped to their knees. "Sarah?" Claire called gently, her hand reaching out to the woman's shoulder. Urgent, but soft. Her skin was ice cold. She was still breathing, but barely, just enough to keep her tethered to life. Her eyes remained shut, her lips cracked and blue from cold and dehydration. Ryan stripped off his outer coat and wrapped it around her. Claire rummaged through the emergency kit on her belt, pulling out a thermal blanket and wrapping it around the frail body. As she prepared to place a portable oxygen mask over Sarah's face, a faint sound escaped the woman's lips. "Tyler." Claire's throat tightened. She leaned in close and spoke slowly, clearly. "Your son is safe now. We found him. And Duke, he's the one who saved him." Sarah's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, she opened her eyes, each movement dragging as it cost her the last of her soul. Her gaze fell on Claire's face, then shifted to Duke, who stood perfectly still beside her, rain running down his soaked fur, eyes fixed on her as if nothing else in the world existed. Her eyes welled with tears. Her lips moved again, barely more than a breath. "I tried to follow him, but I couldn't keep up." Claire held Sarah's hand tightly. "You did the bravest thing a mother could ever do. Trust the only friend you had left. And Duke didn't let you down." Sarah bit her lip and leaned into Claire's shoulder. She didn't sob out loud, but her body shook in waves, like a child caught in the middle of a storm she couldn't wake from. The tiny baby shirt in her hands remained clenched in her grip. Her fingers curled around it so tightly they refused to let go. The ambulance had arrived at the end of the narrow path. Sarah was quickly placed on a stretcher. When the back doors opened, the bright white light spilled out, as if pulling her entire world back into reality. She sagged into Claire's arms, weak but still conscious, still holding tightly to the damp baby shirt. And, for a fleeting moment, reaching out to touch Duke one last time. A silent thank you. No words needed. Duke lowered his head. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail. He just stood there, quiet, still, as if he were a soldier who had completed the most sacred mission of his life. Claire looked over at Ryan, and for the first time, she saw his eyes blurred, not from the rain still falling around them, but from something far deeper, the kind of silent wonder that comes from witnessing a miracle in the harshest version of reality. A mother, a child, and a dog who never gave up on love. Inside the ambulance, soft amber lights glowed over Sarah's pale face. She lay wrapped in a thermal blanket, her breathing still shallow but more stable now. Claire sat beside her, gently holding her hand as if afraid that if she let go for even a moment, this woman might once again slip past the edge of life. Ryan sat across from them, eyes fixed on the vital signs monitor. But in truth, his attention never strayed far from Sarah's face. It held traces of a journey none of them had yet fully understood. After a long silence, Sarah stirred. She tried to lift her head, just a little, her eyes still glassy with tears, but strong enough now to meet Claire's gaze. "Tyler, is he all right?" Claire smiled softly and nodded. "He's safe. He's at the hospital now, being warmed up on fluids, under close watch. He's a little fighter. And it was Duke. He's the one who brought him to us." At the sound of that name, Sarah closed her eyes, and a breath, long, deep, and full of everything she'd been holding in, escaped her chest like something that had waited far too long to be released. Her lips trembled, not from the cold, but from something that had been stirred within her, something like an old door swinging open in her mind, letting in memories she had kept locked away. "He was the only one who believed in Duke from the start," she whispered, her gaze drifting to some invisible place beyond the fogged-up window. "My husband, James. He was a good cop. In 6 years on the force, he never left Duke's side. They were inseparable, knew each other better than most people know themselves. People used to joke, if James breathes, Duke's already heard it. Claire said nothing. She sat still, letting the moment settle around them. Outside, the sound of tires cutting through puddles and the steady drum of rain on the ambulance roof